The champagne glass slipped from my sister Rebecca's manicured fingers, shattering against the marble floor of our parents' Beverly Hills home. The sound cut through the congratulatory chatter of 37 family members who had gathered to celebrate my nephew Tyler's high school graduation. But the celebration had quickly transformed into something else entirely. A systematic dismantling of my academic credentials in front of everyone who mattered to our family. I mean, let's be realistic here, Rebecca continued, her voice carrying that particular tone she'd perfected since childhood, the one that managed to sound both caring and condescending simultaneously. She adjusted her Hermes scarf and gestured toward me with her freshly refilled glass. Sarah's always been the practical one in the family. Not everyone can be cut out for serious academic work. The circle of relatives nodded knowingly. My cousin Marcus, fresh from his first year at Stanford's MBA program, leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned. Rebecca's right. I've seen the level of intellectual rigor required at top-tier institutions. It's not for everyone. He paused, letting his words settle. No offense, Sarah, but community college teaching is nothing to be ashamed of. Someone has to educate the masses. I maintained my smile, the same patient expression I'd worn through countless family gatherings where my life choices became the evening's entertainment. I appreciate your honesty, I said simply, taking a small sip of sparkling water. My Aunt Patricia, never one to miss an opportunity to pile on, jumped in with the enthusiasm of someone delivering breaking news. I was just telling my book club about this whole situation. You know how some people are naturally gifted for academic research, and others are more suited for basic instruction. She waved her hand dismissively. It's not a judgment, it's just reality. Advanced research requires a certain type of mind. Tyler, the graduation honoree, had been accepted to MIT for engineering. He'd been the golden child of our extended family for years, and today was his moment to shine. But somehow, as often happened at family gatherings, the conversation had pivoted to analyzing my career trajectory, or what they perceived as my lack thereof. I remember when Sarah was younger, my mother chimed in from across the room, her voice carrying easily over the murmur of conversations. She always struggled with complex concepts. Even in high school, her teachers would send notes home about how she needed extra help with advanced mathematics and science. She shook her head sadly. We probably should have guided her towards something more attainable from the beginning. Rebecca seized the moment. Exactly. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Community college professors serve an important purpose. They help students who aren't quite ready for university-level work. She looked directly at me with what I'm sure she thought was a supportive expression. You're providing a valuable service to students who are more like you were. The gathered family members murmured their agreement. My Uncle David, a successful corporate lawyer, nodded thoughtfully. The academic world has different tiers for a reason. You have your research institutions like Harvard, MIT, Stanford, places that push the boundaries of human knowledge. Then you have teaching institutions that focus on transmitting existing knowledge to less advanced students. He gestured toward me. Both are necessary, but they require very different skill sets. I nodded politely. That's a fair assessment. Marcus leaned forward, warming to the topic. I've actually been reading about this in my organizational psychology courses. There are natural intellectual hierarchies, and fighting against them just leads to frustration and failure. He spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in that hierarchy. The key is finding where you naturally fit and excelling there. Exactly, Patricia added. And Sarah has found her niche. Teaching basic algebra to students who struggled in high school. That takes patience, not brilliance. It's a completely different skill set from conducting groundbreaking research or publishing in peer-reviewed journals. Rebecca stood up, clearly enjoying her role as the evening's intellectual authority. I think what we're all trying to say, Sarah, is that we're proud of you for finding your level. Not everyone can be a research scientist or a Nobel laureate. The world needs people who can explain basic concepts to struggling students. She paused dramatically. It's honest work. The condescension was so thick I could practically see it hanging in the air like expensive perfume. But I'd learned long ago that arguing with family during these moments was pointless. They'd already decided who I was and what I was capable of achieving. My cousin Jennifer, who'd remained quiet until now, decided to contribute her perspective. I was talking to a professor at Berkeley last week, someone who actually conducts research, and he was explaining how rare true academic brilliance really is. He said most people who think their research material are actually just adequate teachers at best. She looked at me meaningfully. It takes genuine intellectual gifts to contribute new knowledge to the world. The thing is, David continued, real academic research requires not just intelligence, but a specific type of analytical mind. You need to be able to see patterns that others miss, to ask questions that haven't been asked before. He shrugged. It's not something that can be taught or faked. You either have it or you don't. My father, who'd been relatively quiet during this character assassination masquerading as a family discussion, finally spoke up. I remember Sarah's college professors. They were always very encouraging. But you know how professors are. They have to be supportive even when a student isn't really graduate school material. He looked at me with what he probably thought was paternal wisdom. Sometimes the kindest thing is to help someone recognize their limitations early. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with various family members contributing their observations about my intellectual capacity, my career choices, and my general unsuitability for serious academic work. They discussed me as if I weren't sitting right there, occasionally throwing me sympathetic glances that made it clear they thought they were doing me a favor by helping me understand reality. Rebecca, clearly feeling like she was providing a valuable public service, decided to offer some final wisdom. The important thing, Sarah, is that you've found work that matches your abilities. Community college teaching is stable, it provides benefits, and it doesn't require the kind of intellectual heavy lifting that would just frustrate someone like you. She smiled warmly. You should be proud of being realistic about your limitations. I set down my water glass and looked around the room at these people who shared my DNA, who'd known me my entire life, and who'd apparently decided decades ago exactly who I was and what I was capable of achieving. You're absolutely right, I said quietly. I should definitely be realistic about my limitations. Marcus nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of mature perspective that will serve you well. Self-awareness is underrated in today's society. Patricia leaned forward conspiratorially. And honestly, Sarah, you should be grateful you found your niche before wasting years trying to pursue something beyond your reach. I've seen too many people destroy themselves trying to achieve things they simply weren't intellectually equipped to handle. The gathering was interrupted by the soft chime of my phone receiving a text message. I glanced at it briefly, a reminder about tomorrow morning's press conference, and slipped it back into my pocket without comment. Even the timing is perfect, Rebecca continued, apparently interpreting my phone check as validation of her point. You're at an age where most serious researchers have already established themselves. If you were going to make groundbreaking discoveries, it would have happened by now. She gestured around the room. Look at Tyler. He's 18 and already showing more promise than most graduate students. Tyler, to his credit, looked uncomfortable with being used as a weapon against his aunt. But he was 18 and surrounded by adults who seemed very certain about the way the world worked, so he remained silent. David decided to drive the point home. The academic world is brutal, Sarah. It's not like teaching community college where everyone gets participation trophies. Real researchers are competing against the brightest minds in the world. They're publishing groundbreaking papers, securing massive grant funding, leading international collaborations. He shook his head sadly. It's just not realistic to think someone could jump from remedial math instruction to that level of intellectual contribution. Plus, Jennifer added, serious academic research requires connections, institutional support, advanced degrees from prestigious universities. You can't just wake up one day and decide you're going to revolutionize human knowledge. She laughed, but not unkindly. The system has barriers for a reason. My mother approached with a gentle smile, the expression of someone about to deliver uncomfortable but necessary truth. Sweetheart, we're saying all this because we love you. We don't want you to set yourself up for disappointment by having unrealistic expectations about your career. She patted my shoulder maternally. You've built a nice, stable life teaching basic mathematics to students who need extra help. That's enough. That's good. The family murmured their agreement, clearly feeling like they'd performed an act of collective kindness by helping me understand my place in the intellectual hierarchy. The conversation was beginning to wind down, with people starting to discuss Tyler's upcoming freshman year and the various academic opportunities that awaited him at MIT. But then my phone began to ring. The sound cut through the familial wisdom-sharing session like a fire alarm. I glanced at the screen and saw the caller ID, Harvard University, Office of the President. Excuse me, I said politely, standing up from my chair. I should probably take this. Rebecca waved dismissively. Oh, it's probably some telemarketer. They always call during dinner parties. I answered on the fourth ring. This is Dr. Chin. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and unmistakably urgent. Dr. Chin, this is President Morrison's office at Harvard University. We need you here immediately. The breakthrough announcement cannot proceed without the research director's approval, and the media is already gathering. The room had gone completely silent. 37 pairs of eyes were fixed on me as I listened to the voice explaining that the quantum computing research I'd been leading had achieved a breakthrough that would fundamentally change how the world processed information. The patent applications alone were expected to be worth somewhere in the range of $8 billion, and 3 different government agencies were requesting immediate briefings. I understand, I said into the phone, my voice calm and measured. I'll be on the next flight to Boston. Please have my assistant reschedule the Department of Energy meeting for Wednesday, and make sure the NSF funding documentation is ready for my review. I ended the call and looked around the room. The silence was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Rebecca's face had gone completely white. The champagne glass in her hand was trembling slightly, sending tiny ripples across the surface of the liquid. Marcus had frozen mid-sip, his MBA confidence evaporating like morning dew. His mouth was slightly open, as if he'd been about to contribute another observation about intellectual hierarchies but had forgotten how to form words. Patricia was staring at me with the expression of someone who'd just watched the laws of physics reverse themselves. The book club wisdom about natural academic ability seemed to have temporarily escaped her memory. My mother had gone very still, her maternally patient expression replaced by something that looked remarkably like shock. The encouraging professors and the notes about struggling with advanced mathematics suddenly seemed like they might require some recontextualization. David, the corporate lawyer who understood institutional hierarchies, was looking at me as if I'd just announced I was secretly a member of a different species. His certainty about academic barriers and intellectual contributions appeared to be undergoing some rapid recalibration. Tyler, poor Tyler, was staring at his phone screen with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle that had too many pieces. Aunt Sarah, he said slowly, it says here that Dr. Sarah Chin is the director of quantum computing research at Harvard, and that she's been there for 8 years. Jennifer, who'd been explaining the rarity of true academic brilliance, was conducting what appeared to be a frantic Google search on her phone. Her face was growing paler with each search result. There's a Wikipedia page, Tyler continued, his voice barely above a whisper. It says you have patents in quantum computing that are worth billions of dollars, and that you've published in Nature Science Physical Review letters. He looked up from his phone. It says you're one of the leading quantum physicists in the world. The silence stretched on. Someone's ice clinked in their glass. Rebecca finally found her voice. But you teach at community college. The statement came out as a question, as if she was hoping I might confirm that reality was still functioning according to her understanding. I smiled politely. I volunteer there 1 evening a week, teaching basic mathematics to adult learners who are working toward their GEDs. I paused. They're remarkable students, actually. Much more motivated than many of the Harvard undergraduates. Marcus's phone had apparently joined the Google search party. Holy shit, he whispered, then immediately looked around the room in embarrassment. I mean, Dr. Chin, it says here that you revolutionized quantum error correction, and that major tech companies are bidding for licenses to your patents. Patricia was scrolling through what appeared to be news articles. There's a Forbes piece about the 30 most influential scientists under 40, she said weakly. You're number 7. My father, who remembered my college professors being merely encouraging, was staring at his own phone screen. Sarah, he said slowly, it says here that you gave a TED Talk that has 18 million views. About quantum computing applications in medicine. I nodded. That was a few years ago. The technology has advanced considerably since then. David, the expert on intellectual hierarchies, was reading what appeared to be a Harvard University press release. It says you're leading a research team of 47 scientists and that your lab has secured over $200 million in federal funding. He looked up at me with the expression of someone whose understanding of the world had just been fundamentally reorganized. And that you're the youngest person ever appointed to direct a major research initiative at Harvard. The quantum computing breakthrough they'd called about was the culmination of 8 years of research that had consumed my life in the best possible way. We'd solved problems that had been considered theoretically impossible just 5 years ago. The applications stretched across cybersecurity, medical research, financial modeling, and artificial intelligence in ways that would reshape entire industries. But standing in my parents' living room, surrounded by people who'd just spent an hour explaining why I wasn't intellectually equipped for serious academic work, all I could think about was how I'd spent the last decade attending family gatherings where my career was treated as a source of gentle disappointment. Rebecca was still processing. But you never said anything. You let us think. She trailed off, apparently unable to finish the sentence. You seemed very certain about my limitations, I said gently. I didn't want to contradict your assessment. Jennifer, who'd explained the rarity of true academic brilliance, was reading what appeared to be my academic biography. Dr. Chin completed her PhD at Stanford at age 24, published her first breakthrough paper at 26, and was recruited by Harvard at 29. She looked up from her phone. You're 33 now, which means you've been leading quantum computing research at Harvard since you were 29, I confirmed. It was quite an adjustment, actually. Managing a research team while trying to maintain my own experimental work. Marcus had found a video interview I'd given to Scientific American. She's explaining quantum entanglement like it's basic arithmetic. He looked at me with something approaching awe. I can't understand half of what you're saying. The room had transformed from a venue for dispensing wisdom about intellectual limitations to something resembling a fact-checking operation. Every phone was active, every family member was discovering layers of my professional life that had somehow escaped their attention for the better part of a decade. Tyler found my publication record. Aunt Sarah, you've published 63 papers in peer-reviewed journals. And your H-index is... He paused, apparently learning what an H-index was in real time. It says here that an H-index above 40 is considered outstanding for a full career. Yours is 72. Patricia was reading what appeared to be a Nobel Prize speculation article from the previous year. It says here that you're considered a leading candidate for the physics prize, and that your quantum error correction work has opened up entirely new fields of research. My mother, who'd been concerned about my unrealistic expectations, was staring at a photo of me shaking hands with the president during a White House science advisory meeting. Sarah, she said slowly, when did you meet the president? Last year, I said. There was a briefing about quantum computing applications for national security. Several of us were asked to provide technical guidance. David was reading what appeared to be a patent database. The intellectual property portfolio associated with your research is valued at $8.7 billion. He looked at me as if I'd just announced I was secretly a member of the royal family. How is that possible? The quantum computing patents were indeed worth billions, but that wasn't really the point. The point was that we'd solved fundamental problems about how information could be processed and secured. The financial implications were secondary to the scientific breakthrough, though I understood why that might be difficult to explain to people who'd just spent an hour discussing my intellectual limitations. Rebecca had found a video of my most recent conference presentation. You're speaking to an audience of hundreds of scientists. And they're listening to you like you're... He paused, apparently struggling with the concept. Like she's one of the leading experts in her field, Tyler finished. Which, according to everything I'm reading, she is. The transformation in the room was remarkable to witness. 37 people who'd been absolutely certain about my intellectual capacity 15 minutes earlier were now confronting evidence that their certainty might have been somewhat misplaced. Jennifer found an article about my research team's latest breakthrough. It says here that your quantum computer achieved a level of error correction that was previously thought to be impossible. And that this breakthrough makes large-scale quantum computing commercially viable for the first time. I glanced at my watch. I should probably start heading to the airport. The press conference is scheduled for tomorrow morning, and there are several government agencies that need briefings before then. The announcement seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over the room. People began moving again, though with a somewhat shell-shocked quality. Patricia approached first, her book club confidence replaced by something resembling humility. Sarah, I have to ask, why didn't you ever correct us? When we would talk about your career, when we would... She trailed off, apparently unable to finish. I considered the question carefully. You all seemed very confident in your assessments. I thought perhaps you knew something about me that I didn't. Marcus, who'd been explaining intellectual hierarchies with such authority, was scrolling through articles about quantum computing applications. Dr. Aunt Sarah. I'm reading about how your research is going to revolutionize cybersecurity, medical imaging, financial modeling. He looked up at me. How did we not know any of this? It was a fair question. I'd been living a double life of sorts. Internationally recognized quantum physicist by day, family disappointment by evening. The compartmentalization had become so natural that I'd stopped thinking about it as unusual. Rebecca was still holding her phone, staring at a photo of me receiving an award from the National Science Foundation. But you're so normal. When you come to family gatherings, you never act like. She gestured helplessly. Like someone who's revolutionized quantum computing? Tyler suggested. He'd apparently become the family's designated Google researcher. David was reading what appeared to be a news article about federal science funding. It says here that your research has strategic national importance and that you work closely with the Department of Defense, the NSF, and NASA. He looked at me with something approaching reverence. Are you going to be in trouble for missing meetings to come to Tyler's graduation party? I smiled. The breakthrough happened faster than we expected. These kinds of scientific developments don't follow convenient schedules. I paused. But family is important too. I'm glad I could be here for Tyler's celebration before flying back to Boston. The room had completely reorganized itself around this new information. People who'd been dispensing wisdom about my limitations were now asking respectful questions about quantum physics. The intellectual hierarchy that had seemed so clear and established 15 minutes earlier had been completely inverted. My father approached with the careful expression of someone navigating unfamiliar territory. Sarah, I have to admit this is unexpected. When you were younger, your teachers always said. He trailed off. That I needed extra help with advanced mathematics? I finished. I did. I was working on concepts that weren't typically taught in high school. My teachers were trying to be supportive, but they didn't have the background to recognize what I was actually struggling with. Jennifer had found a video interview where I discussed the inspiration for my research. You're talking about how quantum mechanics could revolutionize medicine, about quantum sensors that could detect diseases at the cellular level. She looked at me with genuine curiosity. How long have you been thinking about this stuff? Since I was about Tyler's age, I said. I started reading about quantum mechanics in high school, but it wasn't until graduate school that I realized I could contribute something meaningful to the field. Marcus was reading about the practical applications of quantum computing. It says here that your research could make current cybersecurity obsolete overnight, and that every major tech company is trying to license your patents. He paused. Are you rich? It was such a direct question that several people in the room winced. But it was also a reasonable thing to wonder about, given that my intellectual property was apparently worth billions of dollars. The university and I share the patent rights, I said diplomatically. But yes, the licensing agreements have been quite favorable. Patricia was reading what appeared to be a university press release about my research funding. It says here that you're the principal investigator on grants totaling over $200 million. She looked at me with something approaching awe. That's more money than most people see in their entire lives. The federal funding was necessary for the research, but it also came with enormous responsibility. $200 million meant that 47 brilliant scientists were depending on my ability to ask the right questions and design the right experiments. It meant that multiple government agencies were counting on our research to advance national security and economic competitiveness. But explaining all of that to people who just discovered I wasn't actually a community college math teacher seemed like it might be overwhelming. Tyler had found a documentary that featured my research. There's a whole section about how quantum computing could revolutionize artificial intelligence in medical research. He looked around the room. Aunt Sarah is basically helping to build the future. The transformation was complete. The family gathering had evolved from a celebration of Tyler's high school graduation to an impromptu seminar on quantum physics and the nature of intellectual achievement. People who'd been experts on my limitations were now asking me to explain concepts that had taken me years to master. Rebecca approached with the careful expression of someone who realized they might need to apologize but wasn't quite sure how. Sarah, I have to ask. When we would talk about your career, when we would suggest that community college teaching was more your speed, what were you thinking? I considered the question. What had I been thinking during all those family gatherings where my professional life was dissected and found wanting? Mostly, I'd been thinking about quantum error correction algorithms and the fundamental nature of information processing. The family conversations had felt like background noise compared to the problems I was trying to solve in my lab. I was usually thinking about work, I said honestly. Quantum mechanics is pretty consuming once you get deep into it. Marcus was reading an article about the commercial applications of my research. It says here that your quantum computing breakthrough could be worth hundreds of billions of dollars to the global economy. He looked at me with something approaching disbelief. You've basically invented the future. The future felt more modest from my perspective. We'd solved some important problems about how quantum systems could maintain coherence long enough to perform useful calculations. It was significant work, but it was also the result of thousands of scientists building on each other's discoveries over decades. Still, standing in my parents' living room, surrounded by people who were discovering that their understanding of the world might have been somewhat incomplete, I had to admit there was a certain satisfaction in the moment. My phone buzzed with another message from Harvard. The media interest in our breakthrough was apparently more intense than expected, and they needed me to coordinate with the university's public relations department before the press conference. I really do need to get to the airport, I said, gathering my purse. But thank you for including me in Tyler's celebration. It was educational. As I walked toward the door, I could hear the family continuing to process this new information. Phones were still buzzing with Google searches and Wikipedia articles. Conversations were starting up about quantum physics and patent law and the nature of genius. Rebecca caught up with me at the front door. Sarah, she said quietly, I owe you an apology. We all do. The way we talked about your career, your intelligence, we were completely wrong. I smiled at my sister, this person who'd known me her entire life but had somehow missed the fact that I was leading a quantum computing revolution. You weren't wrong about everything, I said gently. I am too simple for academia in a way. The best scientific insights usually come from asking very simple questions about very complex problems. She stared at me for a moment, then laughed. Even your apology acceptance is more sophisticated than anything I said all evening. As I drove toward LAX, I thought about the family gathering I'd just left. 37 people had spent the evening discovering that their understanding of reality might have been somewhat incomplete. It was a feeling I recognized from my own scientific work. That moment when you realize that everything you thought you knew was just the beginning of a much larger and more interesting story. The quantum computing breakthrough that had prompted Harvard's urgent call would indeed change how the world processed information. But standing in my parents' living room watching my family's understanding of intellectual achievement reorganize itself in real time, I realized that some of the most interesting transformations happen not in laboratories, but in the spaces between what we think we know and what turns out to be true. My phone rang as I pulled into the airport parking garage. This time it was the Nobel Committee. They wanted to discuss my research in advance of their annual deliberations. I answered on the second ring. This is Dr. Chen.